Last week, on the 18th, actually, was the official start of the public review period for the EIR. So that's been out and starting to circulate through a number of state and other agencies who also look at this, as well as the public. The general plan, just real briefly, again, you've had that to look at for a couple of months now. Wanted to point out this map here. This is well, it reads better actually when you can look at it in the document, but these are the areas. If you recall a few months ago, we had a lot of suggested changes to land use on the plan, usually just a parcel or two at a time. These are the ones that ended up showing up in the document, so these are all numbered and these are described in some detail in the EIR. The other thing I wanted to point out on the map here is you'll see a lot of color, and that's your land use policy, and the different colors obviously designate different land uses. You also see some white areas on here. The coastal zone, the Uki Valley area, brook trails, and then the cities are all shown in white because you don't have land use policy in the cities. We're also not changing land use policy along the coastal zone or in brook trails or in the Uki Valley area. The UVAP is going separately. Coastal zone is going to be updated separately from this update of the general plan, and brook trails is not being changed. So one thing when you read through the project description that we tried to explain as best we could was the fact that when we're looking at build out of the county, build out of your land use policy, the things that are changing are the areas in color, and then these actually very small little pockets in there. These other areas aren't changing, and that took a little bit of explaining, but we tried to make sure that the reader understood that. Real briefly, we're now into the CEQA process, and CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act. Has a number of purposes. It's disclosing why you approve projects that have significant environmental impacts. It's an educational process. It tells people what's going to happen. It helps the county coordinate with other agencies and enhances public participation. I think Allison did a good job of laying out a whole number of different times when the public is going to have the ability to come and talk to staff, talk to the board, talk to the planning commission about both the general plan and the EIR. So we have a couple of slides here on what CEQA does and what it doesn't do. CEQA does consider the environmental effects. In other words, if you implement this general plan, what happens? It's a public disclosure document, so everything is out there in black and white for everyone to read what those impacts are going to be. It allows for public and agency input, so folks can tell us if there's something that we missed in the environmental analysis or some other mitigation measure they might want to suggest for a particular impact. A couple of things that CEQA doesn't do. It does not advocate or oppose any kind of project, so you're not going to see in the EIR, don't do this or do that. It'll suggest ways to mitigate impacts, but it doesn't make recommendations like that. It doesn't require project denial because there are adverse effects, and we'll get into those in a second. It lets you say, yeah, something is going to happen, but we think there's a good reason for moving forward with that project. It also doesn't address economic or social concerns unless they turn into a physical impact. CEQA is all about physical things changing out in the environment. So you have in front of you a rather large document called an EIR, which is an environmental impact report. I won't go through all the slides here. One thing that EIRs do, in addition to just this whole first paragraph here, which is looking at all the effects, is it looks at alternatives. So when you look in the back of the document, you'll see some alternatives. One of those, for instance, is just continuing on with the general plan that you have and how those impacts compare with the new general plan, et cetera. An EIR has an extensive public review process. There's a lot of opportunity, again, for review and input. And it's essentially a what-if document. I like to think of an EIR as a document that says, well, what if? What if we took this new general plan and built the county according to the policies and the land use designations, et cetera, over the next 20 or so years? What would happen? So it's really kind of asking that what-if question. And it's important for you to know that because you're the ones who are going to make the decision ultimately to update the general plan to know what's going to happen if you do that. Now, a few months ago, we circulated a document called a Notice of Preparation, which basically says, hey, we're doing an EIR. Does anybody have any ideas out there? That was also for impacts that should be looked at in that document. That also went out for its own separate public review process. We came up with a list of impacts that start here and go on to the next slide. Aesthetics, agriculture, air quality, biology, cultural resources, ecology, soils, and mineral resources, a whole list here, basically kind of everything from soup to nuts. It's a very comprehensive document that looks at the full range of everything that could be affected by the general plan. In that document, in the EIR, when you delve into it, you'll find a lot of stuff in there. Kind of cutting to the chase up to the summary and then summarizing the summary, these are the impacts that the general plan found would be significant and unavoidable. There's a lot of impacts that will happen as a result of developing the county according to this plan that are not significant, that are minor impacts, or that can be mitigated. These are the ones that can't be. Short-term air quality impacts from construction and demolition, that's basically kind of the bulldozers and stuff making their own diesel smoke and so on. Some long-term air quality impacts, some long-term emissions from projected growth. Again, that's mostly cars, but also home heating, things like that. Air quality, you have some industrial land uses shown on the land use map, so there's a potential that they could be a source of toxic air contaminants. And by the way, we've been working very closely with the Air Quality Management District on both the general plan and the EIR, so their comments are going to be reflected in both of those. Biology, you have a lot of sensitive biological areas throughout the county. Now, we didn't try and say exactly